Sure, but it is cold here in Cape Town today. So I've got a little brew going down here, and hopefully you guys have poured yourself a cup of tea as well. And you're going to join me for the next 20 to 30 minutes while we chat through some food for thought, something slightly left field, but we're looking at alternative animal protein sources. Hopefully some of you joined the amazing Coach Tony and the effervescent Kath Hermans on Wednesday, and cooked a lovely little chicken liver risotto that was a throwback to Grandpa Hermans, who was quite a talented chef, and passed that down through all the Hermans genes. And that kind of stimulated today's topic a little bit. So we thought we'd dig into the value around some alternative proteins like that, give you a little bit of background into them, and maybe just plant a few seeds just to consider and some things to think about, because quite often we get very narrow-minded in our food choices, and we stick to the same things, and there might be some decisions and choices that can still be made. Experimentation. So let me know who's all here, how you guys are doing. Hopefully you're having a marvelous Friday and getting ready for our big workout tomorrow morning with Stellenbosch University, which is going to be epic. And obviously our little braai along after that, which I'm looking forward to, because every day that has a braai is a little bit better. Pat Govender, how are you doing? Christina, Marcus, how's it? Iva's here. There we go. So shout out to the Hermans and Pinelands, who essentially started this week's topic for us. Vilma, how are you? Cheryl Finsale, hello. Charmaine Gray, Michelle Rogers, thanks for swapping in, guys. To Niels here, saying hello. So guys, any questions, pop them in as we go along. Hopefully I'll stimulate some thought, or questions at least, in this kind of space. We're going to look at all things that are alternative animal proteins. So the slide that we kind of put together, you can see what we're going to be talking to. Some of the more common ones, some of the less common, and we'll see how we go through there. All right. So let's get that working. Firstly, to recap, obviously, why protein? And you've heard me band on about protein all the time, balanced meal being a combination of protein, fiber, and fat. And we've had Jeff Eds, and if you've done my nutrition course, or if you haven't yet and you want to sign up, go and get it done, and we dig into these things a bit more. But we know the importance of protein. This list is long because it's central to so much of what we do, from health to our body's immune function, to being a bit more effective at losing weight, helping the aging process. As we age, our protein needs increase as well, and to the basics of just growth, recovery, and repair. At the heart of it, the protein's the building blocks for all of this. So it needs to be a part of every meal. Even every snack, we want a source of it. And quite often we go for similar things, but today we're just broadening some horizons with the chat that we're looking at. Quite often it comes down to a choice between animal and plant protein. And this is going to be, the choice or decision around this is going to be based on a few things, whether it's the quality of it, and typically the quality of an animal-based protein is going to be a little bit better than a plant-based protein. That's not to say throughout a day, if we combine plant proteins effectively, we can't still get good quality out of it. But like for like, an animal protein's just got a slightly better amino acid profile and quality compared to most plant proteins. Affordability might guide our choices, plant proteins being a little cheaper than animal. Within animal proteins, obviously, we've got spectrums from imported salmon all the way down to some milk or eggs. So there's all sorts of scales of economy throughout it, but affordability might guide our choices. Taste might. There'll be things that we like in one or the other that guide our choice, and that's fine. Tolerance as well. There might be certain animal proteins like dairy that we don't tolerate. There might be plant proteins like beans that we don't tolerate, and we choose something else instead. Ethics might guide our decision as well, particularly around choice of including or avoiding animal proteins and how they treated and brought up and grown and cared for, through to things like the environmental impact. And a lot of myths and disinformation around this aspect particularly. You can scroll through Netflix and be sent down all sorts of paths, and they're not always the most honest reflection of what's actually out there. But there is an environmental impact to consider. And then again, harping on the Netflix kind of documentary things, the health side, where myths and misinformation translates into the health claims that one or the other would make, a certain animal protein being healthier or plant protein being healthier, and making a choice around that. There's a lot of noise in that space as well. So I think those two things on their own are worthy of a session just to dig into environmental impacts and health and whether there's actually anything either side of the equation. But for many of us, we might choose one over the other, or we might choose a combination of them. And we want to be guided by those different aspects in terms of what we're doing so we can make an informed decision. Now, on the animal side, where we want to improve on some of those things, particularly maybe affordability, maybe environmental impact, there are alternatives to what we might think of as mainstream proteins. So just to bunch them together quickly, and the first is offal. Typically things like liver, heart, sweetbreads, organs that aren't used as primary cuts are alternatives to what we typically find. Some of them a little bit more common than others, but these are some alternatives I'm going to touch on. Then other parts of an animal that encompass essentially nose to tail eating, things like cheek or tongue or tail, how these are commonly used and available, but they are alternative to perhaps the mainstream ones. Then I'm going to also wrap it up with some insects, and quite an interesting side of it all. We'll get into it, but examples of this would be beetles or worms, larvae, and crickets. And all of these are sources of food and sources of nutrition. And I'm just going to give you a little info on each of them. So the slide might be a little bit small, but I just compared a couple of examples here to chat about the nutritional content of them. So we did some liver in our Wednesday night recipe, and quite often people are a little bit unsure of where it fits in, what it's actually like. If you're on a nutrition plan with us, where and how you can use it. But it's actually a beautifully lean source of protein. So per 100 grams, it's less calorie dense than a chicken breast. Slightly less protein, but still nice and lean. So only about 2 grams of fat that you get in a chicken liver. And because it's not a muscle that gets used, it's also pretty soft and tender. So muscles that get used, you might compare it to like a heart or something like that as an offal, which is pumping all the time. It's a much tougher muscle, and even that goes to a steak, for example. So that's why the texture is so soft and beautifully delicate. So it's a nice lean protein. It's a fantastic source of iron, zinc, selenium, some fat-soluble vitamins, and some of your B vitamins as well. So a lot of these options do give us really good nutrition, and sometimes better than elsewhere. So being more nutrient dense than typical muscle meat, these are very good options. Chicken feet is something that's common in Africa and Southern Africa, and it's moderately energy dense, slightly higher in fat, but still a good source of protein. Then things like sweetbreads and tripe and tongue, all of these are good sources of protein. So you'll see, you might not be able to see, but the numbers kind of vary from about 15 to 20 grams of protein per 100 grams. So just a little bit less than a chicken breast, but a good source nonetheless. Some of them come with a little bit more fat than others. So something like the chicken feet have a bit more fat. some tongue does. But a lot of these you can also, you trim them, you cook them, you skim off some fat as you're going, and they do become viable options if these are things that we need to find room for. We want to give them a go. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them, and there's some upside to including these kinds of things or trying them. Nose to tail eating also makes use of things that on this list and others. Some of the upsides to this is that they're so economical. So you think of tongue and cheek and tails, and tongue and cheek, as I said it, I heard it. Chicken feet, tendons, and bone marrow, all of these are options. And to be honest, amazingly delicious, some of them as well. So cheek, for example, some pig cheek or beef cheek, one of my favorite cuts. It's a very lean protein once you've trimmed it. Cook it nice and slow, and you get the most delicious end product that's just soft, kind of falls apart. It's high in protein, cheaper than the rest, and still great lean. So you get so much flavor out of it. Tongue, nice and economical as well. High protein, you cook that for nice, low, slow, and you end up with a beautiful end product. You also get pickled versions or corn tongue or whatever, and it's a very economical source of protein, not too high in fat. Tails, some pig's tails, little lamb's tails, nice kind of little soul food. It's quite high in fat and high in protein, so very energy dense, but again, very economical. So when we're actually looking for economical sources of energy and protein, these kinds of things might play a part. Chicken feet, economical, high in protein and moderate sort of fat. And tendons and marrows, bone marrow, personally one of my favorite things. Most of us, when we make a stew and we suck out that little bone marrow from the bones that are left over there, or we go out for a steak and on starters there's a little marrow dish, something like that. One of my favorite things, and both of them really good sources of some protein, and some other application to them. That when we look at what is on this slide is typically called the butcher's fifth cut, is these kinds of foods. But marrows and tendons are something that we can actually use to thicken soups and stews, and a much cheaper alternative to these fancy collagen supplementations. So they are the natural sources of collagen that supplements are really made from. So either tendon or marrow, or extracted from all the little nose to tail bits and pieces, that's where these supplements come from. So we can actually include them in a cheaper way to level up our food and get a better nutritional profile into them. So just to kind of wrap up on the nose to tail side, is I think it's about being a little bit more open-minded to it. There is a bit of a yuck factor, as there is with pretty much most animal things. Even a steak, for example, many of us have a problem knowing where it comes from or seeing it in action from where it started to how it gets onto our plate. But these, for some reason, just have a little bit more of that yuck factor to them. But they can be part of a delicious dish, using some recipes, playing around with them. And maybe, it's time to try something different. The liver that we did on Wednesday, liver's fantastic. It cooks really quickly, handles some spices and flavors very well, and a little bit of chicken liver pate or mousse, something that's often a treat. And tastes great. We can also, with liver, quite a strong flavor, soak it in some milk or buttermilk for a slightly milder flavor. You're still looking for the nutritional benefits, like good source of protein, trying to get more iron in if we need to find rich sources in the diet, and these types of things become quite useful. I mentioned the cheeks and the tongue being slow cooked, how amazing it is, packed with flavor and just falls apart. Great, stuffed into a little taco or a wrap, can make a nice sort of option around that. So don't ignore the fifth cut when you're looking for something different, looking, to save some bucks on it. You still get some really good quality, or you're actually looking for better nutrition. You can normally get it from these things, because great source of protein, added nutrition from, being a bit more denser in some of those vitamins and minerals I mentioned, and you can sort of use them in the kitchen in different ways. insects, super interesting one. And I attended a conference not too long ago, pre-COVID days, so I guess it was a while ago. And someone had presented to it, and it was the first time really I was exposed to listening to more about it. And done a bit of research for today's session as well, kind of revisited a lot of these. But there's a lot of upside, and I think over the next 20 to 30 years, it might be something that becomes a lot more predominant in the Western diet, where in the East, it's not uncommon at all. I thought I'd just start with highlighting some nutritional value of a few different things. There's this I found on Wikipedia: mealworms and buffalo worms, house crickets and locusts that are commonly eaten insects, and how extremely nutrient dense they are. So most of them are in a dried form, which is one of the reasons they're quite dense, but very high in protein. If you remember a chicken breast, you get about 22 to 24 grams in 100 grams. These are all at least double to even triple that. Crickets, for example, and I'm going to touch on that in a second. A very, very good source of protein. And this is one of the reasons they've become part of trying to find ways to get them into different foods and products and fortifying, and if there's possibly potential with them. There's next to no carbohydrates in them. And a variable level of fat, but not as much compared to wet weight or dried weight conversions on a chicken breast, for example. So they're very nutrient dense, and there's a lot of upside that people are putting interest into insects. The first is that fact that they're really nutrient dense. The second being that they have quite a low environmental footprint and they are very sustainable. There's such a low land and water cost to produce them. There's a low feed cost. For example, to produce like for like kilogram of an insect compared to beef, the amount of feed needed is 1/12 of that. So it's very economical and cost effective to produce. It's got a low greenhouse gas contribution, so where a lot of the arguments against farming livestock and cows, for example, produce a high amount of CO2, which you don't get on insects. Now, it's normal in many parts of the world, but taboo in the other. In the East or worldwide, there are at least 2 billion people who consume insects normally. So there's a quarter to a third of the world's population. It's normal. For us in the West, it's slightly less normal, just because it's not common. But in Germany, there's even street food that uses some insects. René Redzepi, one of the most renowned restaurants in the world, Noma, has had them on the menu there. So they're not uncommon. I think it's just less common for us. More recently, the use of crickets to produce flour and a source of protein, a protein powder that would rival something like whey protein or the like, because of the nutrition that I mentioned on the last slide, how dense in protein it is, and it's a really good source or quality of protein, but coming from a much more sustainable source, economical source. There's a lot of potential out there for these kinds of things. So I don't expect us to be changing our cuisine overnight for this, but I think there are going to be little bits and pieces that drip through into what becomes available to the other 6 billion people over the next 20 to 30 years because of the environmental and cost impact of these kinds of things. There are a couple of local stories that are quite nice things to follow. One actually, or both of these are Cape Town based. But Agri-Protein have looked at fly larvae and producing meal and oils and all sorts of things, compost that is extremely cost effective and good nutritional value, either for producing products or feeding animals. And this has become a multi-billion-dollar company that's now in the US as well, started here, I think, in Philippines. Gourmet Grub, an interesting one. They were based in Woodstock. I don't know where they are these days, but they've started producing a milk alternative that comes from an insect base. And they produce some ice cream that they were actually on offer at the conference I was a little while back. And tasted great. I think when you don't know what you're having, it's a lot more acceptable and you're a bit more open-minded to it. But essentially, it was a dairy alternative produced from this, nice and high in protein, 0 carbs, still got loads of other good nutrition in it, and it can taste good. I think these are the kinds of things that over time we might just start to see a little bit more and more of. But the basis of it is that there are alternatives out there. There are other things that are either on their way or here in bits and pieces, and even a few less common cuts that we can include and make part of a nice, healthy, balanced diet. Sometimes I might just take a bit of experimentation in the kitchen, coming up with some new recipes, or even the simple things like some good old chicken livers for breakfast. So that was my food for thought. Plant a couple things in your mind just to consider that we don't always have to be entirely one-dimensional with it. There might be some alternatives and things there and thereabouts. And maybe there's some things that you have previously enjoyed and you just thought they weren't good for us. They can still find a place. Lorraine, thank you. This session is amazing. You do not eat meat or chicken, but really ensure you eat dairy, fish, eggs, and lots of plants. You do, however, give Millie chicken and chicken liver, which she loves. Beautiful. So chicken liver, it really is one of the most, I think there are two eggs and chicken livers for me combine so many good things into such a small little powerhouse of nutrition. Eggs, great source of protein, good source of some additional fat in there, loads of good vitamins and minerals all tied into the yolk. Loads of good stuff going on. And with the chicken liver, like I mentioned as well, really good source of protein, nice and lean, and one of the most dense sources of iron that we've got. So particularly where the most common deficiency worldwide is iron deficiency anemia. When we're trying to get really good sources in, it's one of the easy economical ways to do it from some food. Pat, sheep trotters high in collagen, they are indeed. One of the places that your collagen supplements would come from are feet and trotters of various animals. They extract it from there. So those kinds of things, if you think of something that's quite gelatinous, so if it's cooked and boiled off and it becomes very gel-like, it's the collagen, the gelatine, that's doing that. So the gelatine's then extracted and converted, it's hydrolyzed into collagen. So you need gelatine to make collagen. So all of those very sort of gooey, delicious things, sheep trotters, bone marrow, those sorts of things, that's where it comes from. And the reason is because the amino acid profile in there is really good. And the types of things that all the claimed benefits of collagen started from there. All right. Cool. Not too many questions. Everyone just saying hi and checking in. So hopefully ended the week with you guys just being able to think about one or two things. Karen, is chicken liver pate acceptable to eat on the Jeff program? Totally. It just really depends how it's made, but you can maybe actually worth me banging together a little recipe for everyone. It really just depends what goes into there, because you can make a nice, good, balanced version of it, not make it too high fat, because chicken livers on their own are quite nice and lean. So it is great. You can get some good flavor in there and use it as another option when we're looking for a snack or part of breakfast or something like that. It might just take a little bit of modification, but why not? So let's actually put together a little Jeff chicken liver pate recipe just for you. Cool, guys. Very informative. Thank you, Pat. Glad to hear that you found it so. Guys, that's me for today, for Friday. Wrapping up another solid week. Hopefully you'll be back with us next week. It's the first week of spring, and we've got loads of exciting things lined up to kind of celebrate and jump into that, because summer's just around the corner. You wouldn't have thought it today with the hail that's just gone down here and all of that. But we're going to start it tomorrow with our workout, and there's some exciting announcements tomorrow after the workout. So check out what's going on there. Reminder, all of our courses and things are on the go as well in the one-on-one sale through to the end of the month. So make the most of that if you need to. We'll see you next week, Monday for Meal Prep Monday, Wednesday for our Jeff Cook, and Friday for another Food for Thought. Until next time, guys. Cheers.